So when did gyms open up for you?
They opened up about a month now. The problem is that I had to quarantine for 2 weeks for work. And then
Mm.
because of that, I couldn't work out for 2 weeks again. And then so I'm just getting back into the gym. And now it's only been like a week since I've been back.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Gosh. Well, my numbers were terrible when I first got back too, and I was even I was even lucky to have a pretty nice gym set up in the garage.
mhm.
Um, I had like a barbell. I had like around 300 pounds of weights.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
I had some dumbbells. Like I didn't have actual squat rack or a bench, but I was
Hmm.
able to do like floor press. I was
Yeah,
able to do like barbell Romanians, pretty heavy. Some like long eccentric sumo deadlifts I did. And then like for the first few weeks, I finagled like buckets on top of each other to use as a
nice.
squat rack, which is super sketchy. It was so
Yeah,
sketchy trying to rack that and unrack it and
you got to
everything.
put it down perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. Like, look, I had to always squat with my wife so she could like spot
Yeah.
me to make sure I'm actually lowering the weight in the right spot and don't kill myself. But uh, even with that kind of equipment, like it still felt awkward getting
Hmm.
back the first week. But um, it's been good since then. So, did you train this morning or?
No, not this morning. Trained. I've only been doing 5 days a week, but I worked probably 60, maybe 70 hours this week. So I
Jeez.
just, yeah, today was the first day I could sleep in all week, so I took advantage of that.
Yeah, no, I for sure would do the same thing. Um, that's crazy. So, gosh, so thank you for hopping on the podcast. Super pumped to have you on here. I know we've been kind of following each other's stuff for like a year, maybe a little over a year now or so.
Yeah,
And love all the content you put out, especially recently. I feel like
thank
you've
you.
been really pumping out the social media content.
Hmm.
Good stuff for people from like beginners all the way to intermediate and
Hmm.
advanced. So this is Trevor Lomax. He's a registered dietitian, sports
Hmm.
dietitian, um,
Hmm.
into bodybuilding, fitness, general fitness. So I'm going to let you take the reins and just kind of give a brief intro of yourself, kind of where you or how you got to where you are today with everything.
Absolutely. And I always smile when I'm introduced as a registered dietitian because it still hasn't like fully sunk in yet. Yeah, so I grew up, my mom's a personal trainer, so I was always around fitness, and I actually rebelled from it for most of my adolescent life. And just we have a gym in our house, and that's where my mom trains out of. So it was like excessively put into my face, and I had wanted nothing to do with it. So about early high school, I started lifting to get better for lacrosse. And then, later in high school, as I became more social and kind of broke out of my shell, it became more about, looking good, building confidence. I was a super, super shy kid, which I think a lot of people don't believe these days because I'm very outgoing now. I accredit a lot of that to fitness and nutrition and just being able to take control of my own life. So yeah, I went to James Madison University, and I was studying computer science for the first 3 years. Decided a desk job was not for me, and all I would do in my spare time is think about fitness while all of my the other students in computer science were going and creating programs. I just knew that this was not my passion. Switched and kind of just fell back into the family business. I knew I didn't want to be a personal trainer because I saw what my mom went through in terms of the hours she worked. So I found another avenue, and nutrition was really that thing that challenged me. It really taught me so much more about the human body than I think training would have, because I just had already known it. I had already been a personal trainer. So I went and studied nutrition, absolutely loved it, like really became my passion. Went to grad school, Florida State, studied sports nutrition and exercise physiology, and really grew there throughout my internship. Got so burnt out at the end of it, left sports nutrition for like 7 months, and then now came back. Now I work at UVA as a sports dietitian, technically an intern, but I feel like I am pretty much a sports dietitian there with the amount of the amount of hours I work. And then also run my own business online, just like Joey, and we be coaching people.
We be coaching people.
We be coaching.
Yeah. So it sounds like you were exposed to like lifting and everything at such a young age. So
Mhm.
you said that you were kind of turned off by it at first. When did you like actually start to love the process of like lifting, or were you just kind of turned
Mhm.
off to the idea of training people?
Yeah, it was fitness in general because I think, as a young kid, I wanted to like rebel against my parents, and my mom was just always tried to push personal, training on us, and we have weights in our house, so it's kind of hard to be like, no, I don't want to do that. You know, she would always try to give us this healthy food, and she's not the best cook, still to this day. So she would try to give us this healthy food, but it wouldn't be cooked well, and I would tell her that, which is probably rude of me looking back, but I'm like, Mom, like you can't be cooking like this and expect me to eat it. Give me that mac and cheese. Uh, that's what my sister made me make for her after my mom made dinner because
Oh my gosh.
she just wouldn't eat it. So yeah, it was high school where I had that outside, the different perspective. We had a strength and conditioning coach when I was a freshman, and I just started playing lacrosse, and he was just such a cool guy. I still remember his name is Chandler, Coach Chandler. And he was, I feel like looking back, he really probably looked a lot like I do now. But back then, I just saw him as like the biggest, most jacked, coolest dude, would roll in with like the shortest shorts and his quads would be popping. I was like, this is a cool guy.
Yeah.
And it's a perspective I didn't have from my mom before, despite my mom was a bodybuilder in the 80s, which I thought was cool. But, you always just rebel against your parents. And then we started, doing some more complex lifts like cleans and snatches. And I was like, this is cool. And as we trained more and more, I just really kind of got it. Like it just kind of stuck in my head. And we actually lost him my sophomore year. We had a different coach who was into cardio and conditioning, and I hated that.
Oh
I
geez.
hate running. Still to this day, it's the worst thing ever. And and so it just gave me so many different perspectives of
Yeah.
training that when I got to college, I started training with my best friend. We both played club lacrosse, and we would go to the gym all the time. And I just caught the bug. It was a small gym at the time before they had expanded to JMU, and it was a close knit community. I had a lot of other friends on my lacrosse team who were also in there lifting all the time. My one friend worked there, and he just got me into the culture of the gym and what it's really about, the community and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So you needed that kind of outside person to bring it in and um, make you, I guess, get interested in it or fall in love with it first. And
Mhm.
so like now, or when you were kind of lifting in college, like was your focus strictly on building muscle, like bodybuilding style, or did you do any kind of like powerlifting, or were you interested in other forms, or like what was it about lifting that you really liked? Was it the bodybuilding
Mhm.
aspect or actual like strength building aspect?
Yeah. So bodybuilding has always been my focus, and that was really where I built the focus up to bodybuilding a lot. And it wasn't in a sense of I wanted to compete. At that time, I didn't even really think about competing at all. And it was really looking back, what I wanted was that confidence. I was a very insecure guy, especially like even at the end of high school where I had, kind of climbed the social ladder. I met a lot of friends. I would get invited to parties. I thought I was cool, but I was still super insecure inside because everything was built on a foundation of superficial objectives that I was trying to reach. And bodybuilding kind of became my therapy through that insecurity of like how to deal with the emotional issues that I was dealing with that I didn't really even think about at the time. It was just kind of like, I want to look better. But I realized looking back, it was just so much more deep than that actual process.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people end up getting into lifting, not necessarily for like they think it's because of the physical attributes that they get from lifting, or even like building strength. They think it's the new PRs, but overall, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like a lot of times it just comes down to confidence. Like lifting, just going into the gym, getting it done, pushing yourself, knowing that you're doing something every day that's bettering yourself, and you're always
Mm-hmm.
continuously trying to be better. I think it really does something to your confidence. I've definitely felt the same exact way. I was super shy growing up, and a lot of people probably think I'm shy now. Um, but lifting has been like, it's just always been that kind of outlet. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of other people that think the same exact way as you and I do, that they've gotten into it and they've kind of, it's helped them grow as a person, not just physically.
Absolutely. And I think for, and like you said, like for you, it's been more like powerlifting. For me, it's been bodybuilding. I think everybody kind of has their avenue. And, you know, I used to hate on people who used to like do cardio and stuff, but I think people
Yeah.
who do a lot of cardio and enjoy it, that's their outlet, you know, and everybody likes to do a different thing. And it's not even about like what's most efficient at some point. I do think weight training, of course, I'm sure you agree, weight training is the most efficient way to get fit, but it's like, okay, but what's like the backside of it that's a little bit deeper and like more psychological?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like I'm always the person, like someone comes to me and they want to do a lot of cardio, but they also want to build a lot of muscle. Like you have to be straight up with
Mm-hmm.
them and tell them that doing all of that cardio is probably not going to be the best sport, that goal of building muscle. But
Mm-hmm.
if it keeps you sane, if that's what keeps you going and keeps you, you know, waking up and ready to attack the day and everything, then we can try to work into
Mm-hmm.
sprinkling that in there somewhere. Um, so yeah, this episode I really wanted to kind of talk about muscle growth. Like, what are kind of your biggest tips? Because, like you said, you're really into bodybuilding style training, and you like not to sound weird, but you do have a pretty impressive physique, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion, and everything.
Thank you.
I know you were flexing the biceps before we actually started the
Boom.
recording, um, but yeah, so like I wanted to kind of get your perspective on what are some big tips. So like what's kind of your number one tip that you would probably give someone on the street if they asked you?
Absolutely. Number one would be patience. Muscle building is the slow side of fitness, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. When we talk about fat loss is actually pretty fast. You know, even if you're just losing zero point 0.5 pounds per week, which is, you know, I guess like the lower end of what's accepted for fat loss, and it's still kind of fast. You know, we talk about this kind of relativity when we say, oh yeah, how long has it taken you to gain weight? You know, maybe 5, 10 plus years, and we're going to take it off in, you know, 6 months to a year, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how much, but that's super fast. Muscle building takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of consistency. And that's the biggest thing is I just see a lot of young guys trying to get in the gym, I guess young guys and girls, and they're trying to put on all this muscle, and they get 1 month, 2 months, 3 months down the road. Maybe they see a little bit of results, but they're not satisfied because their expectation was, you know, through the roof. And then they start to fall off of the routine. And, you know, a year down the road, they're like, oh, you know, like I just couldn't do it. And it's like, you gave it 3 months, bro. Like
Yeah,
you need a lot more time. And I mean, for perspective, I started bodybuilding about 10 years ago. Probably didn't do anything right for maybe about 2 to 3 years. And then once I started learning about nutrition more in depth, started learning about, you know, the proper training regimen for hypertrophy, it still probably took me maybe 5 to 6 years to be somewhere where I was like, okay, like I'm starting to be satisfied with where I'm at.
yeah.
Completely natural too. I mean, of course, steroids are going to speed that up, but it's not something I ever recommend.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a great point. People like you said, they start on a training program, they've never lifted a day in their life or not seriously, and
Mm-hmm.
they think that they're gonna end up looking like someone on a magazine in like 3 months, and it's just not gonna happen that fast. Like you're lucky if like the first year, if you have everything dialed in, like you gain maybe 10 to 15 pounds of muscle. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing if you gain 15 pounds of muscle in a year, even 10 pounds. And then, you know, as the years go on, it just gets slower and slower. And I think one aspect that I think people could focus more on is like, you don't have to be a power lifter, but just keep track of your weights, keep track of how many
Mm-hmm.
weights you do or how much weight you do with how many reps. Because that's kind of like a week to week motivator to keep going. Like if you see like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I did 10 reps last week and this week I did 12, like makes you feel good, makes you know that you're making progress, even though visually you can't exactly see it because it just happens so slowly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say tracking my workouts was never something I did. And it's kind of it's a new thing for me. I've only done it really in the past year, and I've been very consistent about it, minus through the kind of quarantine area where I couldn't go to the gym. So But I will say it gives you another insight into your training that you're not going to have if you don't track those numbers, because nobody's going to memorize the numbers that you do. And I just use an app. It's called Gravitas. It's super easy and it makes it super not time consuming. It takes like 5 seconds to track your workouts. But you can always look back at it and it'll track data, and you can create charts and stuff. And it's just like when we talk about tracking our macros, it's kind of the same thing, just the flip side of the switch of tracking your workouts, where, you know, one of the big tenets of building muscle is progressive overload. And I think people think that they're progressive overloading, but they're either doing it too slow, or they're just not really doing it. And there's something else there that is making them feel like they're fatiguing to a greater level.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you track your workouts, you can ensure you're getting progressive overload in without overdoing it or trying to overshoot it too much. So like, for example, like if you're tracking like 3 sets of leg press, and, you know, like 1 week you did 10 reps, you can aim for maybe 11 or 12 reps, and that's progress. But if you aren't tracking that, like you said, it's really hard to remember back to what you did last week. And you might only be able to remember like the weight. And so every single week you're trying to add weight then, instead of like, maybe your body's just not able to add more weight and you need to add more reps, but you don't know how many reps to add. So basically you can progressive overload in smaller increments that are more realistic to allow you to keep progressing, if you're actually keeping track of it, instead of like making a bigger jump just to make sure that you're going heavier or doing more than last week, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the last time I was leg pressing, and I had this kind of moment where I was like, you know, every time you want to go up on the leg press, what do people put on? They put on another 45.
Yeah.
And it's like, why has that become the standard? Like, and it's become this thing where it's like socially unacceptable to have anything other than a 45 on there. And I'm like, this is stupid. In reality, it should be completely okay to put on a 2.5.
Yeah.
Even just on one side, if that's the kind of progression that you need to follow to continue with whatever your strategy is.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know it's like unrealistic to think exactly this, but let's say you put on, you just add an extra 2.5 pounds to your squats every week. If you add an extra, well, I guess it'd be 5 pounds total. So you add a 2.5 on each side, 5 pounds total each week. If you do that every single week, there's 52 weeks in a year. That's 250 pounds, you know, if you consistently
That would
do
be
that,
insane.
You know? Yeah, like I would love to.
Yes, please.
Exactly. I would love to increase my squat by 250 pounds in a year. And that's taking the smallest increment possible week to week, unless you have those tiny like micro plates that some gyms have. But like, and people try to go up, like you said, by like a 45 each week, or maybe on a squat, maybe it's more like a 25, but still like they try to make too big of jumps because they don't know exactly what they did last week. And that's the only way to make sure they're doing more, is by doing like a bigger jump, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I don't understand it. I think it goes along with that gym ego, but
yeah,
I think it's holding people back more than it's actually allowing them to progress.
Yeah. And same thing for like some people, if they let's say if they're squatting maybe like 290 or 295 or something, instead of going up to maybe 305, they're like, no, I gotta put 3 plates on, I gotta put 315 on, when like you might have been able to execute 305 perfectly well, but 315 is just a little too much for you right there. And people just a lot of times go with their ego instead of what actually they should do. Like maybe they should just make plates that look exactly like 45s, but they are a different weight, and that way people won't be so likely to do that.
I feel like that's what they tried to do with the Olympic plates, because like here at UVA, all of our plates are the same size, but they're different colors. And now like the colors have become like the pride stride of instead of the size of the plates.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like bumper plates are like that. They're all black and everything. They're all the same diameter, but they still are different widths. So they need to make them all the same exact width. That way nobody knows just how little or how much you're lifting.
I think we got a good business idea here. We'll talk about this later.
It might be. We have to stay in touch after this. There was something else that you mentioned too, that I really wanted to bring up. Gosh, I don't know. It just went right over my head. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll just move on. So, as
We'll
far
come
as
back to it later.
yeah, so um, we talked about it kind of being slower as far as building muscle than it is
Hmm.
fat loss. So fat loss, you mentioned like if you're losing like 0.5 pounds per week, that's a pretty good pace. So what kind of pace would you recommend for someone to kind of gain weight then if they're in like a calorie surplus and their goal is to build muscle?
Yeah, I think at the textbook level, it's going to be the same numbers. You know, it's 0.5 to 2.0, and that goes for weight loss and for weight gain. But I think when you look at how much of that is actually muscle, then things are going to look a lot different. And, you know, I don't know. It really depends on how advanced the lifter is, right? If you are a beginner, you could put on 2 pounds of straight muscle, probably not a week, but, you know, you could put that on in a week and a half, 2 weeks, you know, in like a pretty fast time period if you're pretty new. I mean, like if you look at the adaptations that come from resistance training, the first one you're going to get is more neurological. It's a more of a learning, what they call like a pattern learning, where you can learn how to, like the first time you bench press and then you go and you add 20 pounds to your bench press the next time you bench, it's not because you've gained muscle, it's because you've gained a neurological learning of that movement pattern, and your body can do it more efficiently. And you have to, most of your initial strength gains are going to be from that. And then it kind of slows down and then you start to get into hypertrophy and stuff. But, you know, it could be pretty fast for a beginner. But when you look at the amount of fat to muscle that you're building, this is really where you're going to have a discrepancy. You know, I think in fitness, we have two kinds of weight gaining phases that people talk about. We have a lean bulk and we have a dirty bulk. And those are just like the fitness terms for it, but pretty much, right? Dirty bulk is I'm going to eat as much as I possibly can. And whether it's fat or muscle, as long as I'm putting on weight, then I'm achieving my goal. Now, I'll talk about why that's probably not the best strategy later, but then you have a lean bulk, which is kind of the opposite. It's more controlled. You're going to be tracking your macros more than likely.
All right, everyone, we're back. Sorry for the connection loss, but Trevor was just going over kind of the difference between a lean bulk and a dirty bulk. So
we like some adversity in our podcast, something to overcome.
yeah,
So
you never know what's going to come next.
So in a lean bulk is something that's a little bit more controlled. And typically we're tracking our macros, we're tracking our calories, and we're trying to achieve more of a slight caloric surplus, more controlled. And through this, well, the whole point of it is we're trying to put muscle on, but minimize the amount of fat that we're gaining through that process. And I think this is what a lot of people envision when they think of putting on muscle. But when you get more into the science, you understand, you know, you're probably not going to gain muscle without gaining at least some fat. And it's how can we find this balance between getting closer to maximizing the amount of muscle that we're putting on while also minimizing the amount of fat, and just understanding that if we're going to try to minimize the amount of fat that we gain, we're also not going to be hitting our maximum amount of muscle gain, but also that I think it's probably going to get us closer to the end result of where that person sees themselves at the end of the road.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's this like misconception that you can put on only muscle when you do like a lean bulk, which I don't think is really possible unless you're a beginner. Maybe intermediate, but once you get past like mid intermediate, like you're not going to really probably build on muscle without putting on some fat with it. But like you said, it's kind of that balance between trying to minimize fat gain but maximize muscle gain. So you don't put on a bunch of excess weight that you'll have to lose later on in a cut, because when you're kind of manipulating your calories, like there's only so slow you can try to do it to where you just won't gain anything, because like I always say that we don't really have like a set maintenance calorie level. We have kind of like a range depending on how much we're eating. And if your maintenance is 3,000, like on average, but you increase your calories by only maybe like 150 to like 3,150, your body's probably going to ramp up some like systems, like your metabolism is going to kind of speed up a little bit. Your NEAT, your non-exercise activity is going to boost up a little bit, enough to probably get rid of that 150 calorie surplus. So there comes a point where you're going to have to bump up the surplus to maybe 300 or 400 calories. And, maybe you're going to gain a little bit of body fat with it that you don't really want, but it's just kind of a sacrifice you'll have to make to put on the muscle for the kind of your long-term goal.
Yeah, I think there's something to say about building self-efficacy within the process. And this is something I really stress to my new clients who come on is, sometimes I do like to be a little bit more aggressive with them because I want them to see that, look, this works if we do the things that we need to do. And I think especially when people come and want to work with a coach, it's because they've been defeated before in certain aspects, whether that's fat loss or muscle gain. And they want to be like, okay, tell me how to actually do this. Right. So at first, and I used to not do this in my coaching before. And I realized that it's a huge mistake is to be too safe and not show them that this works. So now what I do is I get a little aggressive right off the bat, get them those initial results, something that's going to be motivating, something that's going to have them buy into the process. And then sometimes we'll pull things back and be like, okay, we're being really aggressive. This is working, yes, but it's going to get harder and harder and harder to adhere to. So let's pull back. Let's do it a little bit slower, but also, it works. Okay, so now let's do this in a way that's actually going to be sustainable. You're going to have way better adherence to what we're doing, and you're not going to have those feelings of binge or restrict cycles, whatever.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm so glad you said that. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately too, is to where we obviously want to do things the most sustainable way and take things slower, but sometimes you need that, I guess, external result to keep you motivated to actually go along with the process, especially if you're new. If you're new and you've never actually seen results at all, it's really hard to get someone to buy in to, the perfect plan where you're slowly bumping up calories or slowly bringing calories down, whatever the goal is. It's hard to get someone to buy into that when they've never seen results, period. So I like that you said that, where sometimes you are a little more aggressive to an extent to where it might not be that sustainable, but it's to get them to buy in, because no matter how perfect the plan is, if you're doing it slowly, if they don't buy in and they don't stay with it, they're not going to see progress at all. So I think that's a different take than what a lot of people, a lot of coaches do nowadays. And I know you probably don't do something super drastic, like bump up their calories by 2,000 or something like that. I know it's probably realistic for sure, but no, I think that's an interesting approach, and probably it works really well for a lot of people because they got to be able to see that what they're doing will yield results for them to buy in.
Absolutely. And I think what you said, not bumping up their calories by 2,000, it's that's the art of coaching, right? It's how do I get them those quick results that are going to that create that buy-in, but also not do something super drastic that could actually cause harm. But then also, how can I do it in a way that they can actually achieve what we're setting, rather than creating something that's so absurd that they're never going to be able to change their lifestyle so drastically off the bat. And then you're defeating the whole purpose of creating that buy-in by doing something that's unrealistic right off the bat. And then they're net zero when it comes to self-efficacy, even if they could complete that thing,
Yeah. And it's really in context are dependent on the individual too. Some people, in order for them to really just get motivated to make the change, it has to be a kind of a big change for them. Some people, these small tiny changes, they're this is so close to what I was doing before. I just don't feel motivated to do it because it's not a big difference, but they don't feel challenged. But if you give them something that's a little more aggressive for those types of people, that challenge is what makes them step up to the plate and actually do it.
Absolutely. Sometimes I like to challenge my clients in the way that I'll verbally say hey, I'm setting you this huge goal. And sometimes it's not even a huge goal in the grand scope of things, but with that client, it may be a big goal, or maybe I just tell them it's a big goal and they feel like it's a big goal because I've said, hey, this is a big goal and I know more about nutrition than them. So I'm divulging some of my secrets here, but I'll challenge them and say, hey, I'm gonna set this huge goal for you. Like you said you wanna press hard, you said you wanna go for this. Like we're gonna set this huge goal and you're gonna go for this. And they're like, oh no, like sounds like a big goal. And like it's really a goal that's very achievable for them. But because I've told them it's a very difficult goal to achieve, and then they go and they achieve it, somewhat easily, then boom, all of a sudden you have this incredible amount of buy-in. And it's really just tricking them into, and it sounds kind of deceitful, but in the long run, if they achieve their goal and if they become a better person because of it, and then I could go back and tell them later and be like, look, that really wasn't a big goal, but you absolutely crushed it. And now look where we are, crushing these even bigger goals, right?
Yeah. No, that's really funny. Like you need to frame it to where it's challenging, and that makes people motivated to go ahead and do it. It reminded me of, have you ever been, like, you've been sitting in class, maybe in like high school or middle school, and the teachers, they try to get you to participate. They ask you questions throughout the lesson and everything. They'll ask like the easiest, obvious answer, and you're just like, I don't feel like raising my hand and giving this answer because it's just so easy. Like it's like I don't feel good answering it because everyone probably knows it. But then they ask a question that's challenging. Not that many people know it. There's crickets around the room, and you know it, and you feel so good raising your hand, answering that question, and getting it right. Like it's kind of the same concept where you're more likely to step up when the goal or the challenge is bigger because you feel more accomplished when you actually get there.
Absolutely. And reading your client is so important in that process of like, is this somebody who's going to take this and actually use this as motivation, or am I beating this person down because they're not that type of they don't have that specific type of motivation that responds well to big challenges.
Yeah. It's all about finding that art of coaching with whoever you're actually working with. So that's super interesting point that you brought up there. So as far as like protein intake, there are a bunch of different protein recommendations that kind of float around online, and a lot of them are similar. What do you kind of recommend for someone that is trying to build muscle, and how does that kind of differ if they're in a different phase?
Absolutely. I think I am somebody, and one of my tenets of my coaching is simplicity. I like to keep things simple because there's, as you said, there's so much information out there, and it just bogs people down when you're like, in this situation, it's this, and in this situation, it's this. And everybody I work with in my coaching has a physique related goal, right? When I work as a sports dietitian, this does not hold true. There are a lot more specific recommendations based on what they need because it is a very different population. But I keep everybody on around 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. The exception to that rule would be if somebody's body fat percentage is pretty high, where their fat mass or their total body mass doesn't necessarily correlate well with how much protein they need, where the number that's better suited for them is fat-free mass, then we'll do something more based off of fat-free mass and try to get it closer to that. Typically too, I find that, if you have somebody who's vastly overweight, they may be eating 80 to 100 grams protein higher than what they actually need. And that, again, defeats the self-efficacy portion of coaching, where it's so absurdly high that you can't realistically give them the amount of calories that they probably need to reach their goal, and it not be, like 70% protein. And I've done calculations where I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is not going to happen. And we'll just bring it back down. So I try to keep it about 1 gram per pound of body weight. I think the research does support that. I've seen there have been studies up to 4.4 grams per kilogram, which would be like 2 grams per pound of body weight. And I don't think there's any reason to do that if somebody's not, maybe if somebody is like a champion bodybuilder and probably also taking anabolic steroids. But for the most part, I think it's something that's achievable. It's something that's going to give them, a good boost to their thermic effect of food, right? The energy they burn when eating. It provides that satiety, especially when a lot of my clients are fat loss clients. Actually, I think all of my clients right now are fat loss clients. So, I would say that is probably a good target. Sometimes I do start a bit lower so that we can build that self-efficacy, especially if somebody comes to me and they're only eating, 0.8 grams per kilogram, that the old dietetics recommendation,
Mm.
then we'll like start something slower, build self-efficacy, and try to get up there, and then kind of just adjust from there.
Yeah. I definitely, if I think 1 gram per pound is such a simple way to approach it, and you're covering all of your bases with that. Like, there is some research that a little bit higher at some points, maybe during a deficit, is maybe a little better, but like, I don't know. The research, I don't think it's that conclusive that doing more than 1 gram per pound is better overall,
Yeah.
even if you are in a deficit.
And I think that if that person was somebody who's very muscle bound, like a bodybuilder, and they
Yeah.
were losing, and they were a natural bodybuilder specifically, and they were trying to lose fat and maintain as much muscle as possible, I would probably bump that above
Yeah.
1 gram. But for like your typical lifestyle clients, I just think it's too much stress to be so high on that range.
Yeah. And all of their meals, depending on how high their calorie intake is, all their meals are going to be just like straight protein then, at that point.
Yeah.
Um, and then it just goes back to the art of coaching and changing your recommendations based off of their situation, because you have to be able to get them to stick overall to like the calorie, recommendations too. So if you have to bring protein down a little bit to increase carbs or fats to make it more sustainable for them or more adherable, then you have to do that. And if you're more of a beginner anyway, with not whole lot of muscle mass, you're probably less likely to lose muscle mass too. Like, you already build it easier than someone who's an advanced lifter, so you're probably going to be able to maintain it a little easier too with a little bit less protein. But yeah, that definitely is a challenge with people who are have a higher proportion of body fat and their body weight doesn't really correlate well to what their protein needs are. I've kind of found looking at their height is like a good way to kind of approach their protein intake too. Like, look at their height versus someone else who might be a lower body weight, but they're the same height and maybe a similar amount of lean body mass, and having their protein intakes like kind of similar in that respect.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah. So what's kind of your recommendation on approach to training? I know we talked a little bit about training and tracking progressive overload, but maybe more specifics, like how often would you recommend training each body part? What kind of lifts to do? What order of the types of lifts? Like, what are some general recommendations for that?
Absolutely. And I probably approach training a lot differently than most coaches, and and specifically with my lifestyle clients, because at some point it just matters if you're following the fundamentals rather than the nitty gritty specifics. So of course we talk about the fundamentals being, train each muscle group at least 2 times per week. You want to train within a certain amount of sets. But and even within a certain amount of sets, I don't even specify what it is. I just let them know if it's too low. Like, if they're doing, 2 sets per muscle group and they're doing it only 2 times per week, we may bump that up. But I really encourage people to challenge themselves. And I think that the problem with most people's training regimens in terms of lifestyle clients are that they just don't. They are chasing these vanity metrics that aren't actually correlating to the work that they're doing. So they're looking for things like, am I getting a pump? Am I sore the next day? They're chasing the kind of like the burn that you get when you're deep into a set. But I tell them you need to chase what is true fatigue, like something where you can't really do another rep. And I don't tell them to go to failure, but I say use failure as kind of a gauge. You want to get kind of close, but you got to make sure it's the right type of failure, not that burn, not that pump, not that tight feeling that you get from the pump. Chase that actual challenging repetition set that you really need to adapt. And I try to explain it in terms of just think about your body in less numbers. Think about it more in like if you were a caveman, right? I feel like caveman is kind of like the farthest we got before natural selection kind of stopped. And it's we were built for survival at some point. And if you want to make your body adapt, you need to give it a stress that it needs to adapt to. And in terms of building muscle, it's being able to move something that you previously could not move. And your body's like, oh, it seems like we need to move that for survival. So let's, put on some more muscle, create these adaptations that resistance training gives you. And then next time that you try to do it, or a couple times after you try to do it, hey, now I can do it. And then that's where we get progressive overload. So as long as people are challenging themselves, creating progressive overload, utilizing good form, training muscle groups adequately throughout the week, I don't specify any specific split to do. I do recommend, doing your compounds at the beginning where you can actually get the most out of them, and then following them up with more single joints, assistance exercises. And as long as you follow those basic fundamentals and then challenge yourself on top of that, then your training program is going to be better than probably 90% of the people that you see working out in the gym.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the biggest things you mentioned there that I agree with is effort and pushing it close to like actual like muscular failure. Like, I don't think you need to go to failure, like you said, but you should be getting close. And I think a lot of beginners struggle with this. One reason, because they think they have to do like super high reps on all of their sets, and they kind of stop, like you said, once they get that burn, they get that pump, they get that burn, when necessarily they might be able to do 5 to 10 more reps still with that burn. And I think if beginners, if they lowered the reps a little bit, stayed in maybe the 8 to 12-ish rep range on most things, and didn't go up to like sets of 20 or 30, it's easier to get close to failure and not stop because it hurts, I guess, because you don't get that build up, that you don't get that burn. Like if I'm doing a set of 30 and 30 is like to failure, I could probably get to set 20 or rep 20 and feel a huge burn, feel super uncomfortable, and I might end up stopping at rep 22 because it's just so uncomfortable, and I think that I'm actually close, but I'm not. But that doesn't really happen when you're working in kind of the lower 8 to 10, 8 to 12 rep range. You don't get that buildup of metabolites. You don't get that extreme burn, and you kind of reach muscular failure first before that burn comes into play, I guess.
Yeah, I will say what the program I've been really enjoying lately is an undulating style program that I created a couple of years ago, and I've just gotten back to it, where I have 2 strength days. I have an upper body strength day and a lower body strength day at the beginning of the week, which I find really builds my self-efficacy for the week, really makes me challenge myself. And then the last 3 days of the week, I have a more quote unquote bro split, a chest and back, shoulders and arms and legs. And I split those up in 3 different days. And those are the days where I'm going higher reps. So on the strength days, it's more like, probably about 4 to 6 reps. I'm doing a little bit more sets, probably about 4 sets or higher as I get deeper into the program. And then on those other 3 days, I'm doing more like 3 to 4 sets of probably 8 to 15 and trying to hit those higher repetitions a little bit, get more of that hypertrophy in. And I really like that program because it does all those things that we talked about earlier about just like coaching in general. It builds that self-efficacy, makes you challenge yourself, but then you also get those things that make you feel good. You get a nice pump, you get that burn. And when you psychologically, I think getting those things makes you feel good no matter what your level of expertise is, because it's like, there's just something about that burn and that pump that make you feel like you're doing something. And it's kind of that, like we talked about before, getting those quick results. It's that acute result that you can see in the moment. That's like, cool, I feel good about this. But then really it's the other work that you're doing that's really pushing you forward in the long term.
Yeah, no, I definitely love that kind of balance, like you said. And I think having those kind of like strength days, they teach you, like, if you are getting close to failure, they teach you what getting close to failure actually feels like, and then that can translate to those kind of higher rep days. But if you're just doing strictly sets of like 20 to 30, which I feel like males and men maybe not as much, they go into it when they're beginners. A lot of times they do try to do heavier weights, but I think maybe this applies a little more to women. They'll be beginners and they think they have to do sets of 20 to 30 on everything, body weight stuff and that type of stuff. Like I said, they get you that burn, but a lot of times you're falling too short from failure than what you probably should be. but I like that kind of balance. It's kind of like what I do. Like I do more powerlifting style training. But after my powerlifting movements, I do that kind of like bodybuilding stuff. Sets of 8 to 15 for like everything else pretty much because
Mm-hmm.
obviously I can't go heavy on every single exercise or I would break my body.
Yeah.
And I just love that feeling, that like pump you get, when you are doing the higher reps and just overall gaining size too. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I won't take up too much more of your time. I know it's been close to an hour so far, but um, is there any kind of like last tip you want to leave the audience as far as building muscle? I know we talked about patience, calorie surplus, weight gain, protein, training even. Is
Mm-hmm.
there any kind of last tip that you would give them?
I think that one thing we didn't talk about that's super important, or I guess it's two things, but um, really managing your sleep and your stress, especially with sleep, a lot of your, where you're actually building the muscle is during your sleep. It's in that recovery process. So it's balancing, focusing on your nutrition and focusing on your fitness and the actual lifts that you do with the sleep and then also the stress. And if you can balance the recovery and the actual stimulus that you're giving your body, you're really going to set yourself up for those long-term gains that you're probably looking for. In terms of stress, just managing your stress. And I think people will say, manage my stress. How do I do that? And then they stress about it, which is very ironic. But it's, it's if meditation is something you like, personally, I'm not a huge meditator. I'm more into like journaling or having moments of reflection, deep breathing, listening to calming music as I sleep. Like a lot of those things de-stress me more than like meditation. I know a lot of people in the fitness community are definitely into that, but it's just finding for you what's going to calm you down and not stressing about things that you really can't control. And that goes more into the mindset stuff. But between sleep and stress, if you can get those things on point along with your fitness and your nutrition, that's really going to set you up for long-term success. And then it's just doing it day in and day out. You mess up here and there and you have some fun in your life, and you're still going to see those gains if you have kind of that, that 20% that creates 80% of the results, right?
Yeah. No, perfect. That was actually, I was thinking after I asked that question, like sleep would have been the next thing that I brought up for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, perfect. So thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be able to hop on these podcasts in the future again some more.
Absolutely. Thank you for
So
having me.
yeah, of course. Let the audience know like where they can find you on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you have, so they can look you up and follow your stuff.
Absolutely. Best place to find my outward facing content is on Instagram at Trevor Lomax. And then also I do, we have like a private Facebook group where I do more in-depth actionable content. So you have to find me on Instagram if you want access to the exclusive group. That's the deal. So find me there.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again. And for the audience, I'll see you guys in the next episode.